This is In the News with David Lucas, and tonight we're talking about the student loan debt crisis. Now, before you jump to any conclusions, I want to make sure I state all of the facts, lay them out for you so you can have a chance to look at them for yourself. You may not agree with the things I'm sharing with you, but I'm going to give you all of the facts. First of all, it is true. From 10 years ago to now, the student loan debt has increased from $865 billion to $1.7 trillion. And that means that the student loan debt has gone up 107%. Now, that makes it a crisis. And that means that this is on the president's desk to do something about it. Now, if you're like me and you went to college and you have student loans, you've seen that there are certain things that you can't go without. If you have a family, you can't go without food. You can't go without a place to live. In many cities, you can't go without a car. So it's not like Americans are drumming up a bunch of debt. They're just trying to live their lives and be able to pay their bills. And by nature of priority, putting food on the table or paying my student loan, that's going to mean that the food's on the table has got to happen first for me and my kids before I pay out a student loan. So raise your hand if you've ever had this thought: I'm never going to get finished paying this student loan. Exactly, right? So let's talk about what's really happening with the student loan. Several years ago, the student loan changed altogether, and those of us who were taking student loans had no idea. Basically, the federal government was not only backing the student loans, but they were actually issuing the student loans as a lender. And their servicers were not always the friendliest people to work with. And I've talked with many, and I've been online on hold with many of them. And we're going to talk about that in just a little bit. There's been a little bit of predatory lending going on with it, and it's a big mess. We're going to talk about that some at the end. But first, I want to give you some of the arguments that people are looking at. People like Bernie Sanders and other ones who are suggesting that the U.S. government should forgive all student loan debt, or maybe $10,000 for each student, or $50,000 for each student, because there's been some issues with it. So one of the reasons for forgiving the student loan debt is that the student loan debt in and of itself is slowing the economy. That means it's creating less jobs because these students that are coming out of college cannot create businesses. They struggle to get business loans and things like this, and they struggle with their credit and things like this. So this prevents creating new jobs. So although many Americans think this has nothing to do with them, it does in fact have a lot to do with all of us, because when these jobs stop coming and the income stop coming, the only ones who are making money are the creditors and the lenders. No one is out there actively producing new jobs and producing new income. So that's a problem. 75% of students who went to college went to either 2-year college or 4-year college, and they left with student loan debt. There's about 30% that didn't get any student loan debt. Maybe they had family or friends, or maybe they had scholarships to where they didn't have to take any student loan debt. But that doesn't mean that this doesn't relate to them also. So by the end of 2020, 11% of all students, and all students are former students, meaning 49 million students, 11% of them were either late or in default on student loans. And this isn't good either. Now, several things have changed about student loans over the years. Many were changes that were made before our time. So one of the arguments against student loan forgiveness is simply this: it's unfair. People are chiming in and saying it's unfair to forgive student loans. Now, I get that. Well, some students are saying, well, I paid my student loan off. I did it the hard way. I was responsible. Well, your situation may be different from somebody else's. It's still a good argument, but I want you to understand something. Everybody has different family issues. Everybody has different income brackets, whether they own a business or they work for somebody else. Everybody has financial difficulties of some type. So when people say it's unfair or something like this, it's hard to judge that. It's hard to base that on anything, because your situation may be totally different from somebody else's. Maybe you have one kid. Maybe they have 3. Maybe you're married. Maybe this person is single. So you don't know what that household is dealing with when they're struggling to pay back your student loan. Actually, I think that people who have paid off their student loans know how difficult it is and should be more forgiving of people who are struggling trying to do the same thing. So some opponents of forgiving student loans are saying, because I did it right and I paid my student loan off, the other person should not be helped because that's unfair to me. Another argument would be there are several people in America never went to college and they don't have student loan debt. And so is it fair to help a bunch of people who have student loan debt and not help those who didn't even go to college? Student loan debt has disproportionately harmed Black people and people of color. Student loan debt has disproportionately hurt Black students and people of color. Forgiveness of this student loan debt would help to rectify racial inequality. So studies have shown that the Black students tend to have more debt in student loans than white students after they graduate college, significantly more. And this is because many of the Black students find themselves going to predatory for-profit schools. So the advantages for Black students are greater than they are for white students. Because also, when Black students come out of college and they get a job and their white counterparts get the same job, Blacks are paid much less than their white counterparts. So, as you can imagine, how difficult that would be to pay off student loans where you had more debt and less pay, and less debt with more pay. Another argument against the forgiveness of student loans is that any large amount forgiveness, $50,000 plus, for all student loan borrowers would disproportionately help those in higher income brackets, which tend to make more money over the long term in their life body of work. Meaning, this means that doctors and lawyers, PhDs, master's degree students would come out, generally speaking, making more income than those that never went to college and those who have a 4-year degree. So another argument that is made is that student loan forgiveness, especially if it's at an amount of $50,000 per student, would give more advantage to the wealthier of the Americans. There are many Americans that never go to college. So that's one of the issues. And those who have opportunity to go to college and take student loan debt should be responsible for that, correct? Especially some of the people who end up getting masters and PhDs and doctorates. And that is because they make higher incomes than most average Americans. So people seem to feel that this is unfair. In many ways it is. Much like back in 2008, 2009, when we had the economic crash around the world, really, the American economy failed and collapsed. And that sent a wave around the world. Everybody was affected by that in some way that had dealings with America and their economy. So we had to bail out the banks. We had to bail out Wall Street. And many people thought this was unfair. And even after having done it, many of the corporations that took benefits from that took that money, gave it to their CEOs. Their CEOs quit. They took payouts and they left the economy still in shambles. So people have a bad taste in their mouth about forgiving loans and forgiving debt. I understand that. But when you talk about it being unfair, well, that's a whole other issue because it may not be fair to some. But all in all, it still may be the best solution for the country. Another argument for student loan forgiveness is you'd have to take a look outside of the student loan parameters to really see the effects of what's happening to people. Because people have such a large student loan debt, many of those same folks are not getting married, they're not starting families, they're not buying homes, they're not starting businesses. All of these things affects the psyche of the American people. When you have to keep putting your life off because you have a huge debt, it's not healthy. Studies have shown that by the age of 30, most people that have student loan debt has saved half as much as they would have saved for their retirement than without those of student debt. Some people argue that by forgiving student loan debt, we set a precedent for this generation and the next, that people will always want their student loans to be forgiven, or they'll always be looking for a handout of some sort. I disagree with that. That's the same thing as saying that, going back to the crash of the economy back in 2008, 2009. Those same firms that we gave money to bail out those corporations and Wall Street, they don't still have their hand out looking for favors, looking for money. That doesn't just happen again and again and again. That's not how it works. But people think that everything that we do is habitual. We create a habit and it happens over and over again. But that's not how things work. That's not real. That's not reality. The way it works is, when we find that there's a problem, we need to find a solution to fix it. And then once we fix that problem, we move on. We don't just continue to go through the cycle over and over, not learning from the mistakes we've made. We find solutions and we keep moving forward. Right now, we're not making any decisions. By making no decisions, that means that the problem gets worse. Some seem to believe that the best solution is lowering the student loans. If college didn't cost so much, or if college was free, then students would never have this problem. Back in 1976, the laws were changed and students were no longer able to file bankruptcy if they found themselves in financial straits. Now, this is the only loan we have in America where people can't file bankruptcy. So what I'm saying is, you can file for bankruptcy, but it's unlikely that your student loans will be included in the discharge. All the other loans, like corporation loans, credit cards, bank loans, car loans, are able to be discharged with a bankruptcy. Bankruptcies come with penalties. There's legalities to go into that. But student loans are the only ones where people cannot discharge the debt that they have in student loans. This was by design. This was something that was decided by the government and the banks. But I think this is something we need to look at. If the government decides not to forgive student loans, they should at least consider giving people the option to file for bankruptcy on those student loans. They'll take a hit with their credit, with their income, and different things, but this is a solution. Now, there's an argument against filing bankruptcy for student loans also. For students to be able to discharge their student loans through a bankruptcy allows students the opportunity to abuse the system. Now, having said that, the system itself, let's talk a moment about that. The system was created so that people could take loans, get their educations, and thus get a job paying enough to where they could pay their loans back. But this isn't working out. For many of Americans who've taken the debt, they can no longer pay the loans back, and with the increasing cost of living, they cannot pay the loans back, and the debt is increasing. And this is a problem. Now, the government is faced with another situation. The government, when it took on the student loans, it became the lender and the guarantor of the loans. But they let those loans be serviced by servicers. And these servicers work directly with people to collect the monies and to make sure things are steadily going as they should. But some of these servicers have abused the system. I'd like to mention one, and that one is called Fed loans. And basically, Fed loans lost their contract, and many of the students now are moving from Fed loans and are being assigned a different servicer. But what happened with Fed loans? Fed loans was sued by one of the states because Fed loans was increasing people's interest rates and causing students to go into default and having all sorts of problems. In short, It was predatory lending. And I personally have had problems with Fed loans. And so I've seen how difficult it is to work with them. And I often wonder, why is the government working with a company that's so corrupt? And after having worked with them for so long, how can they not fix this in some kind of way? So what I want everyone to understand is that students go through a lot just getting their education. I want to express to everyone that I believe that many of the students, not all, but many of the students are doing their best to pay back this student loan. They don't want this debt. Let me tell you why. If you happen to be, if you own a company, or if you happen to own a license of some sort, whether you own a salon or a barbershop or a real estate company or something like this, and you have to get a state license, if you default on your student loans, many of these states will close your business. Also, if you default on your student loans, many of these companies are required to help garnish your wages. And this puts an extra additional strain on people's finances, because when you can't rent an apartment or pay for a car or own your business without feeling the terror of, if you don't pay your student loans back, your business could be closed, you feel overwhelmed. And I understand this, and I understand that there are many people who don't know that this is going on. But I want you to understand that people feel overwhelmed. Teachers don't make nearly enough money to pay back many of the student loans they have to get. And teachers are often required to get a master's degree to continue their education, improve their education in order to keep their jobs. The schools aren't paying for this education that they're getting. Teachers end up having to pay that money out of the small salaries they're already getting. And I'm pretty sure by now, many of these teachers have a second or third job just to keep going and be able to pay these loans. I hope that this has opened your mind into a little bit of what people are thinking that have student loans. I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm not even saying that I delivered it perfectly. But what I am saying is that people are struggling financially. Not only that, they're struggling psychologically as well. They're feeling beat up and overwhelmed by these student loans. Anytime you have a debt, you never feel completely free. You never feel completely at ease. And so many of these former students who are now professionals, who are struggling with paying back their student loans, whether they're doctors, lawyers, teachers, engineers, scientists, computer, IT, research, whatever they're doing, whether they're owning their own businesses or they're working for someone else, they're struggling to pay back these student loans. And it's a lot. And it's a strain, and it's not easy. Now, for those of you who have paid back your student loans, I applaud you. I think it's one of the toughest things you could ever do, and you deserve some praise for that. But also, for the single moms and single parents and married folks that have 2 student loans going on at the same time and trying to raise their kids, I empathize with you. I understand how tough it can be. Now, I'm going to share with you something personal that happened to me. I was working about 3 jobs at one time, and I owned a business. Fortunately, I owned a business that was making pretty good money. And I was paying off my student loan, which I have a student loan, a big one, because I went to higher education schools. I was working on getting a doctorate. And so that means I had a big student loan. And there were times when I was literally paying $4,000 a month, $7,000 a month. There had been months where I paid $9,000 trying to quickly pay off my student loans because I was attacking them one at a time and trying to pay them off as fast as I possibly could. And I had help. My wife was helping me do it. But fortunately for me, I was in a profession to where I would get lump sums of money at times. And because of that, I was able to apply that to my student loans while I was still working a full-time job to pay my normal bills. So I basically had 2-3 jobs trying to pay off my student loans. I'm still not done with it, but I want you to understand, it's really, really tough. And it's really, really crazy because when you talk with these loan servicers, many times your interest rates go up, your payments go up. They see that you can make larger payments like I was trying to make larger and larger payments so I can pay off my principal faster. And when they see that you can make larger and larger payments, they naturally start raising your payment. And it becomes more and more strenuous because that interest rate, many times you're only paying the interest rate, you're not paying the principal. And to get to that principal, you have to pay large sums of money to pay that principal down. Anybody who's had a credit card understands what I'm talking about. So I just want everyone to know that students or former students are exhausted by the student loans. They're exacerbated. They are doing everything they can for the most part. And you literally feel like at the end, you feel like you're never going to pay it off. And I don't think it's supposed to be that way. I think you're supposed to be able to hit a finish line, pay the thing off, and be done with it. And I think that we should make that as easy as possible for people to get those student loans paid off so that they can live their life and move on. So that's David Lucas with In the News. I hope this was helpful, and I hope you were able to see both sides of this argument. And I hope you understand it, and I hope that you will empathize with the people who are really struggling. Thank you. If you like content like this, please like and subscribe for my channel. Thank you.